Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and this is the 4th development diary for Crusader Kings III. This one is called Development in Buildings. It is quite interesting. It is one of the tamer ones, you know, in regards to what I was expecting. I was really hoping for religion here, but I guess that will come later. In this dev diary, they talk about the very basics of everything related to, you know, your holdings, your infrastructure, your baronies, and where your levies and your taxes come from. I think this is quite interesting because they choose some different approaches here that quite easily highlight what their new game design vision is, because they take some stuff from Crusader Kings II and make it infinitely better by changing it around and refreshing the entire idea of it. Now, that is of course mostly buzzwords what I just spit out, so let me explain by going through the dev diary. Let's start with this interface. You know, I'm just going to explain it. We've explained this in the past. This is one that I think we've seen this, but for a Scottish province in a very early dev diary. So this is the Earldom of Torment. It is somewhere in Ireland. I don't actually know exactly. It looks like Desmond or something. I don't exactly know where it is. It is in the Kingdom of Ireland and the Empire of Britannia, of course, in the de jure hierarchy. It is held by you, and then there are some new stats here. There's control, development, and the popular opinion. Culture and faith already being something that we all know. And then down here you can see the baronies of that county, with a top barony of course being Limerick, the castle holding. So you have the castle, a city, a bishopric, and an empty barony that, you know, you can build up if you have the money into any of these 3 forms of baronies. All of this is fairly well known. It's just, you know, tax, loot, levies. That is something that we've seen in Crusader Kings II. This is unchanged. This looks as though, at first I thought it was a modifier for the province, but I actually believe that this simply shows what kind of countryside is in this barony. So this, for example, Limerick, is a forested countryside. Whereas, for example, you know, the city could be hills. The bishopric could be farmland. So on and so forth. Meaning that you want to build your specific buildings, or rather your holdings. You know, for example, what you want to build here will be depending on the actual terrain where you're building it, which is unique because Crusader Kings II didn't do that. But let's skip over that because I actually want to address control, development, and popular opinion. All of those are interesting. They are substitutes for old values used in Crusader Kings II, and they make the game much more flexible and much more layered, I would call it. So let's start with control. Control, you know, the game fairly easily gives it away, essentially describes how much control you actually have over this county. So for example, you may own a county, but at the same time, of course, if it is sieged down, your control level goes down, because those sieges make it so that you can't properly administrate it. This is interesting because it influences what kind of tax, what kind of levies you get from it, and it is interesting because it is a very flexible number. In Crusader Kings II, and this is the best example where you can see that essentially they changed, you know, a very static thing and changed it into something very flexible. In Crusader Kings II, if you go out and you just conquered a piece of land, be it a county, duchy, or a kingdom, as long as you directly conquered it, for example, in a holy war or a conquest war, you will get a modifier on every single barony of the land that you just conquered, and that modifier, or those modifiers, are called New Administration and Recently Conquered. Both of those push down your tax and levy income from that province to practically nil. So essentially you would go out and you would conquer a province, and then you would just wait for 10 years or whenever those modifiers expire, and you would then only care for that province, because until then there is no chance of you ever getting up the levy and the tax numbers, so you simply wouldn't care for it. Now in Crusader Kings III, and this is incredibly promising because it also opens the pathway for so many different mods, in CK3 it is different. In CK3, we're looking at a control value that you can alter via your councillors. You can send your councillor into, for example, you know, any random county or barony that you just conquered, and they will go around and make it so that your control level rises quicker. You will be able to actually go on and build, you know, certain holdings. So they specifically point out the bishoprics being able to push up control in your county, meaning that you gain more influence over that county by building. You can also go ahead and build different buildings that also give you more control, and so on and so forth. This is crazy to me. It's an entirely different approach than in Crusader Kings II, where you just had those static modifiers that are unchangeable. With this change, it suddenly becomes important that the player cares for his immediate land that he just conquered, instead of just ignoring it for a decade. What they have done here, in my opinion, is exactly doing what Crusader Kings II couldn't do. They're doing something that really, truly, despite being a very tame, a very basic feature when it comes to, you know, how you as a player will kind of interact with it. But what they have changed here is such a big change in how you can approach provinces, conquest wars, and building tall, for example, that this truly warrants being in its own environment in Crusader Kings III. This is one of those game design visions where flexibility means superiority, meaning this is much, much better than the old system. I think this is a step in the right direction, and if they keep up this particular design philosophy, then I think this will actually be a tremendous step forward. Development is exactly that. Now, in Crusader Kings II, you had two values. You essentially had economic strength, which would determine how your, general income would do by that in that province, etc., etc., and then you had technological advancement. What they're doing now is they're putting both of those together into development and are essentially unifying what should have already been unified. So they particularly point out, for example, that, obviously Constantinople will be very high developed at the start of the game, because that is just what that city was. The infrastructure, the economic strength, and the technological advancement all were very meaningful at the time. And I think that this is perfectly adequate. I think that this makes it so that technology all of a sudden is much more available. And when I say that, what I mean is, in Crusader Kings 2, you just send your counselors, to spy on others and get their technological advancement. You have new council missions that make it so that, they just farm technological advancement and whatnot, but it is entirely detached. I could have one of the poorest provinces, but with the highest tech level in, for example, melee or skirmish tech. This is utterly ridiculous. It makes no sense whatsoever. Now, in Crusader Kings III, this will be different. It will be a unified value, and it will be a value that you can also influence, but, and this is the fun thing, it will be a thing that can be influenced directly. Meaning, for example, that, whatever the terrain value is of a piece of land, if it's mountains, obviously the development level won't be that high, and it will be tougher to get that development level up, but you can get it up. If you choose your steward, you can go and increase development, which means that you can make your domain truly better. We had this with the prosperity factors in Crusader Kings II, but it was a fairly hamstrung system, or it is a fairly hamstrung system, because essentially it just, is a very passive bonus. You just sit there, you don't do anything to gain it, you don't focus on it, you don't care for it. It just happens if you don't get sieged down. With development, we have something much more tangible that actually works directly into the game flow. As I said, terrain, where that county is, actually factors into the level of development that you can get, and it will also, similar to both technology and not actually economy, I guess, but similar to technology in Crusader Kings II, it will spread outwards, meaning that, for example, Constantinople will spread it towards the surrounding counties. This is an excellent system. Technology in CK2 was always one of those, neglected stepchildren, really, you could say, of the game, and combining that into a more active approach when it comes to economy means that the player is much more interested and involved in how much developed his counties are. This is another step, much like Control, that goes towards further enabling playing tall. In Crusader Kings II, I've said it before, in Crusader Kings II, playing tall it's one of those things. I've done this calculation before, in multiple series. Whenever people ask, hey, why do you never build up your holdings? Why do you always simply hire mercenaries and then conquer? Well, the answer to that is that building a holding or building up a building in a holding is always, there is not a single circumstance where this is not true. If you have the money to build a holding, like the keep for example, or to hire mercenaries and conquer a county, a duchy, or even a kingdom, the option to conquer will always be more beneficial in the mid and long-term run compared to whatever benefit you get from the building that you would be building. Whatever you conquer is always worth more, it will always be worth more, and there is no incentive not to do that. In CK3, that could change, simply by being able to actively interact with your technology rate, which should, and I mean, I'm just going to reiterate, it says unlock some other special options. I really hope that this primarily means that we get the option, for example, to build better buildings that give us more knights, that give us more specific, it's not called a retinue anymore, that give us more specific men-at-arms, stuff like that. If we can see the technological advancement via the development, we could actually build tall by simply having better units compared to anyone around us. Now, if this is a thing that becomes more active, where the player can be more active about it, and it seems like it, seeing as the entire, non-just levy side of the war kind of system in Crusader Kings III is something that the player can fully determine by recruiting the men-at-arms and the knights, I will say that this is one of the best steps that they could have taken with a mechanic that is, mostly invisible to the player, but making it more important to the player makes it so that we are now looking at a situation where it is much more active and I don't know, it's just one of those systems where Crusader Kings 3, from the looks of it right now, is making a huge leap forward without much noise. Because obviously this system is very basic, nobody talks about it, nobody says, oh, buddy, I built up my my realm today, can you believe it? Everybody says, look, I conquered all of Germany. And then, you know, people are excited for it. But this development issue raises an entirely new playstyle to a new level. Building tool is viable, hopefully, or it should be viable from what we can see here, and it is encouraged. And this is entirely unique. CK2 does not have it. Now, let's jump on, let's move forward to popular opinion. Popular opinion essentially is unrest, but in a new form. And when I say that, what I mean is unrest in Crusader Kings 2. Crusader Kings 2 is looking like essentially just a chance of, hey, do I have to squash another peasant rebellion? Because those rebellions rarely ever are a threat to you. Most of the time, you have, even if you have fewer units, you always have better units than the rebels. You will just destroy them. So essentially, you're just looking at a percentage chance to, having assemble your troops and then being angry at it and having to say, all right, let's get together and let's just beat up some rebels. In Crusader Kings 3, it looks as though popular opinion substitutes that chance, by itself, and also makes it much more flexible. So what they want to encourage, and this is interesting because I personally cannot see it yet. I think this looks like the weakest mechanic out of all the ones that we're looking at here in the dev diary, and there are some strong ones, so being the weakest one doesn't exactly make it terrible, but I believe popular opinion, until I see it in action, until it is proven that it works, I will be very doubtful. So, the idea is that they want to establish here that popular opinion is essentially an unrest value, except it stands for a bit more. If you place one of the local lords, if you can recruit any local lords, for example, and you place them into territory that is their culture and their religion, or at least one of those, then the people will generally have a, higher opinion of you. This should encourage, for example, if you're walking around and you conquer heathen land, this should encourage bringing in local rulers of, the local culture that you just conquered, but maybe your religion. Making it so that the popular opinion doesn't suffer too much. Now, whether that will actually encourage it, I mean, in CK2, everybody always and everywhere places people of their own culture and religion because those are the only ones that you can recruit, first of all. And second of all, there is no incentive to take an opinion hit in Crusader Kings 2 by placing somebody there that, is a different culture or is a different religion, even worse. Oh, this is my bad, there you go. So what I hope, what is essentially happening here is indeed the encouragement and the successful encouragement, hopefully, that you will place somebody in, your counties, your duchies, that is essentially against you. Different culture, different religion and whatnot. I can't see it happening. I look at this and I can read the paragraph and I understand it, but in my heart of hearts, I don't think that this will work. I think players will simply still, unless they're role-playing, of course, which is super cool. If you do that, keep it up. But I think most of the time, players will simply place their own culture and their own religion in whatever holdings they have to give out. If this mechanic changes it, I will welcome it, no doubt, but I don't see it happening. Now, from that, let's move on. Let's talk about holdings. You have different focuses of holdings. Of course, castles provide levies and fortifications, cities, taxes, and development, and temples mostly taxes, levies, and control, which is interesting, that you can increase control by spreading your religion. I guess it does make a lot of sense. I will say, I personally, and I've heard a lot of criticism, of course, for this, but I personally actually like the art style of, these particular holding images. They look super cool. They look gritty. They look medieval. Like, I'm looking at something and I just know I'm a dirty peasant working in this damn field until I will pass away. And that's just my lot in life, right? Or these look very, very interesting to me because they look like they're going for a much more, I would phrase it much more dark, much more realistic and gritty art style, and I'm definitely in favor of this. Now, when it comes to buildings, they changed it. They changed it dramatically, because the old buildings, you had 1 million of them, and practically none of them were worth building, let's be real here, but you had an infinite amount of building slots. Now, this is no longer the case, as you can see here, or rather, as you can see here, you have building slots, and with that being said, these new buildings are all simplified. And I know simplified is a curse word in this community, but I don't actually think this is bad, because barely any of the buildings in Crusader Kings 2 are worth it. The buildings that are kind of worth it, the keep and whatnot, they can truly increase whatever you get out of the province that you built them in, but at the end of the day, most of them trash buildings. They're trap buildings. So trap buildings, or trap option, just to describe what that is if you haven't heard of that term. A trap building is essentially, or trap option is essentially something that exists but is never the viable or the most valuable path that you could take. And this, I will say, still looks like some of these aren't really viable. I mean, think about it. You spend 250 bucks, right? And then you get 0.5 per month out of it. Meaning that, what? It takes like... Oh god, math, huh? I want to say like close to 50 years to bring in the income that you just spent on the crop fields. Why would you build the crop fields? You could instead conquer something and make it so that whatever you conquered gives you more money by increasing control quicker. The way I see it, these buildings, they don't really look that beneficial to me, at least some of them. You know, you always have trap options. I think it's very difficult to avoid. Give me a second. Alright, I'm back. It's very difficult to avoid trap buildings, but at the same time, I mean, the crop field, you know, looks horrible. This one, bastions and curtain walls, looks very, very decent. Pastures, honestly, with the levees on top, maybe decent. Wooden barracks looks nice. There's many buildings here that are, you know, out of sight. We can't see them. I would assume that we at least have 10, maybe 12. This is pretty neat. I like the idea where they say we essentially want to build make building tall viable. Whether they actually achieve that is a different issue. I don't see it that way yet by looking at the crop fields, but, you know, all of these numbers are obviously not final. It's under development, so don't sweat it yet too much. I'm just hoping that they will make building tall more viable by truly encouraging it. So far, not really convinced. Now, beyond that, and this is the most interesting part, or one of the most interesting parts anyway, of this dev diary, beyond that, you have Dutchy Buildings. New Dutchy Buildings are essentially buildings that you have to build while you hold that duchy, and if you ever get rid of that duchy, then you no longer get the bonuses. It's not active anymore. But if you hold that duchy, you can build a building for that entire duchy that gives you a bonus on, let's say, national scale. You know, there's no nation, of course, in CK, but you know what I'm talking about. And these buildings are truly interesting, because this is the one step where I will say I can see building tall made viable 100%. With these buildings, I'm still doubtful because the bonuses don't seem big enough to actually make it viable to build them, but with the Dutchy Buildings, 100%. Getting 2 more knights, amazing. Army maintenance down, great. Knight effectiveness plus 20%, that is huge. 20% of anything is huge, really. Strategic marches, pretty cool. You have garrison size, levy reinforcement rate, fort levels, supply limit. All of these are amazing, and think about it. You spend 550 ducats on those. That essentially means it's 2 of these buildings, well, 2 and, you know, 0.2 buildings of these buildings, and in comparison, these buildings are trash. This is amazing. You want to build these 100% of the time. So the way I see it, we have a situation now where they recognize that to be able to build tall, buildings need to be powerful. You shouldn't nerf them, you shouldn't leave them the way they were, you should buff them. And I believe that these Dutchy buildings are a buff to the building system, you know, in comparison to what we otherwise see. For example, if you're a small duchy, you might as well rather build this instead of, you know, conquering another county. Because this is worth it, even though the money, of course, again, could be spent on another county conquest. It's difficult to assume how many different Dutchy buildings there are. It's difficult to assume what unlocks them. I would suppose that probably what they talked about here, the fact that development unlocks some other special options, should be able to properly unlock some Dutchy buildings. I hope so at the very least, but of course we can never be sure. And yeah, this is really it for the dev diary. I think this is a very effective way to make building tall viable. Whether that will actually be achieved is something else, but I can only hope. Now, the last thing, of course, is that there are historical buildings. So both ancients and those built during the time, you can build some of these historical buildings. For example, the Alhambra and the Tower of London are stuff that you can build. Some are 3D models. So essentially, they integrated the Great Works feature, except with all of those different, you know, rooms. For example, the torture room, the private conversation room, the spikes and whatnot, the tavern. All of those are out, but the actual Great Works are in. And I think that is a good choice. I think that is a decent choice. Oh, there you go. I think that's a decent choice. I can agree with this. Originally, I had heard that they wouldn't have integrated any of the Great Works in Crusader Kings III on launch, but here we are. Apparently that was wrong information, so I'll take it. I'm definitely a big fan of seeing that stuff, especially on the map. The map is eye candy, or it's going to be eye candy anyway, because that is what that new Jomini layer does for, you know, any Paradox game, really. I mean, just look at Imperator Rome. The map is gorgeous. So with that being said, I'm very excited for most of these mechanics. I'm still very doubtful when it comes to the buildings and whether they actually make building tall viable. I would like to hear your opinion. But all in all, I am very, very happy with the flexible approach that they're taking here, and I am very happy to hear that the next dev diary will be about the new scheme mechanics. Let's absolutely go. Now, thank you for tuning in, and I want to thank the members of this channel. So first, let's start, of course, with the Barons. Suspicious Duck, Stefan, The Richest T, Snywolf, Sai, and Herman. Thank you for supporting the channel. And then I want to, of course, thank the Honorable Dukes, where we have a new one. We have Kenneth, thank you, and welcome to the membership of this channel, and thank you for being a Duke. We have Eric, Lexo, and Benedict as well, of course. Thank you all for your support, which, you know, is what keeps this channel going in the form that it is currently running. If you also want to support the channel, then below the video there will be a join button. You can, you know, check out the membership perks that you would get if you were to become a member. And other than that, there is a Paradox affiliate link in the description. If you buy a game via that link, you will be able to buy the games to the normal price, but I will get a little bit of a share from it. So if you want to help the channel out, then consider doing that. Other than that, thank you for tuning in. Let me know what you think about this dev diary in the comments, what you think about my speculation about how effective this will prove in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Later, alligator.